and want to thank Chris DeCenzo from Growth Strategy Partners for taking the lead and working on these with us. We used to do these before COVID, and then everybody got crazy busy and was selling everything they had, so it was somewhat of a moot point almost. But now things are sort of back to, I'll call it normal, and we now want to bring that service back and offer people a look inside and have a conversation about the best ways to plan and what things are looking like and what's the market and what are folks saying. And so we opened it up a little bit this time around. This series will include folks from manufacturing, distribution, and from the retail community. So really looking forward to hearing today from Tom, who's on our team here at NASGW and runs the scope data side of things for us, and Kevin from Winchester, and some of the planning and strategies and things that they're seeing as well. So really appreciate all of you again joining. Thank you for this. It's hard to know sometimes what to do and how to look forward, and we've built what we think is one of the greatest tools available in the industry for helping to accomplish forward looking and really seeing what's happening out there in the market in our scope program with our distributor level data. And now we're pushing, I guess Tom told me the other day, close to 1,000 stores are spooling up in our retail side of things with our partners in the point of sale community and the retail community. So thanks to Coreware and Celerant and Orchid, we've got a lot of stores that we're getting data from now regularly and able to return that all back to you as you look toward the future in our planning, what you're producing, what you're putting in inventory, or what you're selling to consumers. So really grateful for you all being here. I'm going to shut up now and turn it back to the experts for the day. Chris, Tom, and Kevin, thanks so much. Good luck, and I'll listen in. If you need something, let me know.
Thanks, Kenyon. So presenters today, myself, Chris DeCenzo, best looking guy there on the left, managing partner, Growth Strategy Partners. We accelerate the growth of privately held companies, prepare them for sale. Most of it's done in the shooting sports space. Was a president of one of the wholesalers for a while, and basically as part of my consulting and presidential duties, I've created a lot of forecasts. So that's what I'll kind of share with you today. Tom?
I'm Tom Hopper. I've been handling big data for quite a while, so I really enjoy working with the data and finding that turning data into information, something you can action on. So looking forward to that. Most of you have met me in the past within NASGW. Then we've got Kevin Winchester also. Thanks, Kevin, for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm Kevin Winchester. I'm a sales manager for Winchester Ammunition. I have been in the industry for about 17 years, been with Winchester for about 6 of those, and thought that maybe I could provide just a little bit of information about how we do it here and how we forecast for demand in the ammunition space. So glad to be here, and thanks for the time.
Thanks, Kevin. So everyone else can see who else is here. This is all the registrants. We've got a lot of sales and marketing people, 42%, president, CEO, and it's nice to see some purchasing people here. And then on the almost half are manufacturers, some wholesalers, retail, and others would be some of the media and other segments. So we've got a good group of people today, and we'll try to address both the functional side and the manufacturer versus wholesale side. So agenda, why are we going to forecast? What's the reason for doing this? What's the impact that it could have on our business with what impacts the forecast? How do you build a more data-driven forecast? And then how does this impact your plan? So we're going to start first off with a poll before we get going. I'm going to launch a first poll because the question is for the audience here, how formally do you forecast your demands? What I'd ask you to do is click on one of the buttons, from everything at the top saying we don't do any forecasting at all, to we create a more informal, high-level forecast, or we forecast formally at the financial level, let's say just a budget, or we've got it at the product category level, or we actually do it at the SKU level. So everyone just clicks on an answer. We'll share it with the audience so everyone can see where is everybody today, and we can maybe somewhat customize the presentation as best as we can. Oh, we're getting 70, 80% almost voted. So I'm going to click on that and we'll get this closed up. I'm seeing, interesting, a very, see, I get to see the poll before it's actually released. So looks like it's pretty much there. So here's what I'm going to do. 27, 27, 22, 26. All right, so I'm going to share it with everybody. You can see here now, everyone can see that. So no one's not forecasting, that's great. But you got a kind of an even mix, 25% all the way through of informal to at the SKU level. Well, that's great, which is interesting. We got a varied audience here. So we'll see what we can do to provide insights to those that are at the very informal level, to those that are actually at the SKU level. All right, let's jump in now to why are we planning? Why do you want to forecast? Benjamin Franklin, didn't realize he was the one that said this. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Now, let's look at this in the big picture, right? There's some things that if you fail to plan, it's not going to have a big impact on your business or on you personally. You know, I think about driving to work, and you've seen that construction coming up, and construction is going to start on Monday, and then you start driving to work on Monday, and you forgot about construction, you're going to be late. Okay, not a big deal. But what happens if the demand for the business is exceedingly high or exceedingly low, and you just don't plan for it, you don't think through it? That's going to cost you some business. One example, one story we had, I actually did some work for a company that made sweet and dry cranberries. Didn't realize this till I actually got into it, but I guess I did realize that cranberries is a crop and has a limited inventory. It grows in October, November. It's harvested November, October, November, and whatever you get, that's it. And you've got to then plan your year of how much you sell, what price you sell it for, so you don't run out too early, but you don't sell it all too quickly, run out, and you don't make as much money. So huge planning session around that. I'll share a little of that story a little later. But the whole point today is you've got to really plan, and it's everyone here is planning, just to what extent. So let's talk about what the impact would be about forecasting and planning. I'm looking at just last 2 years of NICS data, right? So you can see the demand on a monthly basis. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to overlay just a chart that shows what the trend is, and just clean up the picture a little bit so you can see that was the demand for firearms, in particular adjusted NICS in 2022. So now the question is, if your plan was this, and I'm going to talk about inventory in particular, if your inventory plan was this, how does that impact your business? Well, obviously, if you look in some areas, you'll have too much inventory, and in some cases, you won't have enough inventory, and that is a cost to your business. Okay, what's that going to cost you? Well, you're going to have out of stock conditions if you don't have enough inventory, and that's going to impact your customer. They're not going to be happy. You're going to lose profits on that because you don't have the products. There's kind of lost profits on that side. There's going to be an impact on the customer from a satisfaction perspective. I'm sure all of us, if we go to buy something at location A and it's not there, you're going to go to location B, and if you don't get it in location A on a repeated time frame, you might not go back to location A again. The excess inventory is a whole other thing that costs you money, right? You've got excess money tied up in inventory. Cost of capital, it might be an impact on your line of credit. You actually spend a lot of time potentially moving things around because you got excess. You maybe got to make room for other inventory. And then there's waste of time, right? The time it might take you to replan because you have too much or you have too little. So without going into this in great detail, I think you can all see there's a great impact on the profits of the business by not having a good plan and therefore good inventory. We'll get into this a little later. I was talking with Kevin a little earlier today and talking about not just at the finished good level, but at the raw products level. If you don't plan the top level very well, you can't get the raw materials because of the lead times on that. And again, that's going to cause some out of stocks and or excess if you don't plan correctly. So the point here is, yes, there is an impact on your profitability specific to planning. Kevin, Tom, anything you want to add to this before we jump to the next section?
I mean, the goal here is really how do we minimize the out of stocks so we maximize sales? You know, consumers will get upset if they can't find it, they're going to go somewhere else. And if they still can't find it, they're going to change. They're going to buy something else. So, you know, how do we optimize?
Exactly.
Well, and this forecasting process puts all those in charge of your supply chain on notice. You know, as we forecast by the item level, it shows up on those spreadsheets that then gets passed along to the supply chain team, and they've got to be prepared for everything from cardboard boxes to the metal that goes into the product in our world. So
exactly. So again, we're not spend a lot of time on hopefully the need for forecasting, because everyone here is actually doing it now. It's just maybe at what level. So let's talk about what impacts your forecast when you start putting this plan together. And what we've identified, is some of the 7 major factors in our industry that impact the building of that forecast. And it's not just the 7 areas, but it's your assumptions around. This is one of the key things I've learned over the years of putting plans together, strategic growth plans or business plans or forecasts. It's all about the assumptions we make. And if we don't challenge those assumptions, that's where we go wrong. It's not about that we bought too much, we bought too little. It's the assumption we made about why we went and bought more or bought too little. So let's start with what I'm calling the trifecta correction. Trifecta is not necessarily a good word. I use it to refer to the fact that, from 20 and 21 in particular, we had COVID that drove a lot of demand because there was fear. The COVID drove angst in the United States, civil unrest, and that created, again, fear, which people drove and bought more guns. And then the election. That's my translation of the trifecta, and that was probably one of the biggest demands in history on the firearms industry. We've done very well. It's now corrected itself, but the question is, where is it? Is the correction? Are we done? The other thing, ATF regulations, okay, and I use ATF, but any regulatory changes that ATF and or administration might put through, that's one of the bigger impacts, obviously, on demand for our firearms. People are afraid that they're going to lose access to it. They start buying more. Obviously, election concerns. We talked about the elections. We'll actually get into more. How does that drive the buying demand? The economic environment. How does discretionary income impact people buying firearms? Is firearms a discretionary purchase or not? We'll talk about that. World events. We've just had the whole Russia concert killings. You've got Israel, Hamas. You've got a lot of things going on in the world. How does that impact? Ukraine is something has definitely impacted our supply chain. We'll talk about that. A big piece is historical demand, right? How does history repeat itself? We're going to dig in a lot on that today and dig in a lot to the data. But honestly, the most important impact on anyone's forecast is your growth plans. What are you going to do from a company perspective? New products, new markets, new channels. This typically should have the biggest impact on your forecast. But the other things we'll also talk about. Now, next piece of this relative to forecasting is what we call the probability impact analysis. So we're going to talk about these 7 things, but the real question is, A, what's your assumptions around it? And then the second thing is, what's the probability of it happening? And if it does happen, what's the impact, right? So you can see here on the bottom horizontal axis is the probability of something happening, very low on the far left, a little more happening on the right. And then the vertical axis is what's the risk? I think many of us are thinking maybe about the election, but more importantly, civil unrest. Is the likelihood of that medium, low? Is the impact high or low? So as you start going through looking at all these different factors, that's something that needs to be taken into account. And we're not going to get into this anal analysis today, but it is something to think about as you start putting your plans together. This is another level of refinement. All right, so now let's get into, we've talked about, why do you want to forecast, the impact it'll have on profitability. Let's now get into some of the data and why we think the forecast is going to be what it's going to be. But before we do that, we're going to take another poll, because the question we have now for people is, what do you think demand's going to be for 2024? So second poll, if you would click one of these, do you think demand, this is going to be at the firearms level, okay, just at the macroeconomic NICS level, is it going to be down at least 8%? Is it going to be down maybe 1 to 7, flat with 2023, up 1 to 7%, or up at least 8%? What is your crystal ball telling us? A lot of people are voting. This is good. Okay. And I'm going to share this in a second, and then we move on. Everyone's doing a very good job participating today. Y'all going to get gold stars at the end of today, because your participation rate's very good. All right. So I'm going to close this now and share it with anybody, because it's really not changing too much. Okay. Take a look. So most people think it's going to be up 1 to 7%. Almost the same amount think it's going to be down 1 to 7%. So what does that tell you? The 14% are in the middle at flat. Only 13% think it's going to be up 8%. 6% think it's going to be down 8%. Tom, what's your reaction to this?
Mixed emotions here, guys. I mean, come on, there's a 60% swing right in the middle of things that we're going to be plus or minus 7%. So how can we trim that down? How can we get better insights to put us where we want to be? And then what is your growth plan? How are you tied to that? So I think there's a lot of wishful thinking right now, but TBD.
Yeah, we've got almost, we've almost got the same amount of people thinking it's going to be down as much as it's going to be up to 1 to 7%, right? So, and again, not that 1 to 2% is a big change, but if you think it's going to be down 7 and it actually is up 7, that is a change, right? So let's go through and we'll give them our answers here. Check and see if any questions. No questions yet. Again, if you have questions away, please feel free to ask them. Let's now talk about the data-driven forecast. So let's talk about data that's available to us within the industry. NICS data is the one a lot of us turn to when it comes to firearms, right? We see that on a category basis, monthly basis, even by state. You can slice and dice that pretty much any which way. I use that a lot in the industry to decide where to focus the growth, either by segment, by category. You've got ATF, which does the manufacturing report. Okay, again, it's a great in terms of firearm production. Doesn't impact sales, but it is production, although it is, again, 2 years old. Many aren't aware, IBIS World creates some market research. They've actually got a guns and ammo report. I typically have to pay for it. I actually just saw the recent one that came out. Unfortunately, I think it's definitely very large, macroeconomic, look at larger companies, doesn't really impact more of the privately held company, but it is out there. National Shooting Sports Foundation, which we all know about, they've got the industry reference guide and a lot of other supporting detailed work. Much of that comes from Southwick. Southwick has their own market research. They actually have some economic research. Again, if you want to do something individually on your own, you can actually hire Southwick to go do that. And then Scope. NASGW has Scope. That's what we're going to focus on mostly today as wholesalers and I think both manufacturers. It's phenomenal data. I know when I was talking to Kenyon a few years ago, at least on the firearms side, maybe Tom, you know this, it represents over 50% of the transaction volume in firearms. Tom, do you know?
It does, benchmarked it against NICS, and it's probably right around 60, just over 60%.
Right. That's pretty good, right? And I think before that I was using Gunbroker, which was 5 to 7% of the transactions that they estimated. So this is great. So being a data guy, being an engineer, love the Scope data, and yeah, I'm going to plug it today. All right, so let's now where the data is. But what we're going to do, we're going to focus on NICS and Scope data to talk about the forecasting, kind of one little slice of this segment. So let's talk first about the correction. I call it the trifecta correction. Is it done? Is it over? personal belief or what the data's telling me is yes, it's done. You know, last year was down about 4% year over year. But as you look here, you see October, November, December, you know, of 23 outperformed 22. So January was down, what, 5%? February was just down kind of 1%. In my perspective, and I'll even ask Tom, we think the correction's over. It's done. There may be a little point or two here and there, but generally speaking, the correction's over. Tom, you want to talk to that?
No, I completely agree. I mean, come on, we've come off of the surge, the spike where, you know, NICS checks were off the charts. And if you look at 23 and this one, for example, when's the last time you saw seasonality impacted with the NICS checks and following more of a seasonality curve? So we've got the summer doldrums showing up. We've got the first quarter rebuild, getting back into business or, you know, buying back. So definitely following the seasonal trend there. So yes, to answer your question.
Got it. Next piece, their assumptions on the election. Always a big thing. Every time I talk to someone, you know, they think, oh, it's gonna be a great year. It's an election year. You know, so we do know now it's Biden or Trump. The assumptions that I'm making is that the election itself is not going to have a big impact on demand. Maybe a little bit. We'll talk a little about what that is. But in order, you know, let's go down the Trump side, right? If Trump wins, we've used the word Trump slump in the past. We'll talk a little about that later. I think it was less of a slump than a correction. But obviously, if Trump gets into play, the assumption there is that there will be no restrictions on firearms. And at the same time, the demand will not increase. If Biden comes into play, wins again, then yes, there could be, but it also depends, does he control Congress? Okay. Now, if he controls Congress, then you've still got the Supreme Court, which has been mostly siding on Second Amendment. Generally speaking, there's a few states that have been all outflyers. I think Illinois, the assault weapons ban, but mostly anti-gun legislation has not done well. The real question here is civil unrest, right? So I'm going to link the election to civil unrest. Is that if Trump wins, is that going to bring out some protesters? If Biden wins, is that going to bring out some protesters and then cause a civil unrest? That's kind of, I think, the wild card on this one that we'll talk about also a little bit more later. I do want to talk about on the election concerns. You know, this is NICS going back to 2000. And if you look at the growth, I'm going to go back to even Bush back in 2004. There was a growth after Bush became president. You can see that up to 2008 with Obama. Obama had a little increase, but what really happened was 2012 when you had Sandy Hook, the assault weapons ban, and actually NICS grew 30% in the last 2 months of the year. And then you've got a lot of incidents that are driving a lot of this. When you get to the 2016 with Trump, you had a build up, obviously, because everyone believed, according to our great pollsters, that Hillary Clinton was going to be president, and therefore the fear grew demand. Trump did win that, and then it corrected really back down, I think, to normal. So the belief here on the election side is that on the demand side, it's not gonna have a big impact. Tom, you want to talk on that one also, just as we're not on all these, but at least that one, because that's one I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions on.
No, I mean, I completely agree. Look how things fell off in 2017, 18, and 19. It fell back to pre-election levels, so it definitely normalized. So there was fear of the election and fear of the unknown. But as soon as that fear was taken away, things normalized. So then, you know, you start looking at Biden, it's like, oh, wow. Look how his numbers went. That was more fear than the election of Biden. But look how it normalized after the fact. I mean, even with tragedies in 21, 22, Uvalde in 22, I mean, things are still normalizing because it was such an excessive surge with COVID and how it really peaked. So the election itself, I'm like you, I don't think it depends on who's controlling Congress, and the overall impact is probably negligible, or, you know, there's an influencer, but how large?
But how much? Exactly.
I've got a comment on this too.
Yep.
You know, I'm hearing a lot of words around normal, and when I look at it from when I got into this industry back in 07, something like that, to now. We say normal, and yet normal is twice as big as it was when I got into the industry. So it's normal, but we always have to think in our forecasting about what is normal. It's almost new normal is a better word, probably.
Yeah, we've been using that new normal, right? And again, even though we're, I think the corrections, corrected, if you will, we're still 20% above 219. To me, 219 has always been that base year, right? So what is that normal, and adjust accordingly, right?
Yeah, as people get back into using some things too, it's like they stick around, and that's a lot of what we do is try to figure out how to get them to stick around and keep participating, which obviously keeps demand up.
Yeah, and you were going to do that by giving away some free ammo, I think. Is that what you were saying, Kevin?
How come the first question you asked me about free ammo?
Give away free ammo, keep them engaged, right? All right, back to our assumptions. What's the assumptions on regulatory? Again, there's federal and state, we can't get into all these in great detail, but the belief here is that, there's not been a lot moving. You've got the bump stock that's been going on. It's been on, it's been up, it's been on, it's been off. You've got the pistol AR stock, which has been on, it's been off, it's been on, it's been off. The belief here is that at the federal level, there's not going to be a lot of changes. Again, Biden comes into play, he's got to own Congress to be able to make the changes, and he's got to be able to make changes that will pass the Supreme Court, which is, again, at this point, mostly conservative. So the assumption on the regulatory changes is not going to be much. World events, okay, Ukraine has been a big impact. It has been reducing the ammo supply. The U.S. border security, I'll put that into a world event. I think it's a sleeper, personally. I think there's something that's me being superstitious, if you will, that something's going to happen. Lately, it hasn't had an impact, but that could be a wild card, right? If something like Russia happens in 4 or 5 different places in the United States because of people coming from the border, whatever, that could be a driver. You've got the Taiwan just had the elections. You had the Haiti, being run by gangs. Is that going to spill over into the United States? A lot of what goes on, it's nice in the United States. It's not near us. There's no physical countries necessarily connecting us besides, again, Canada, Mexico, which we've got mostly friendships with. So the world events assumption is that it's not going to have a big impact on demand. Economic environment. Unemployment is very low, but inflation has been high. Cost of goods are high. Consumer price index is high. And so that drives the discretionary income. Does that mean with discretionary income that if the discretionary income is down, they're going to buy less discretionary items? Is firearms a discretionary item? Did some research a long time ago that identified that they were discretionary as long as it's not a safety concern. If unemployment goes up, if there's safety concerns, people will spend money on firearms to protect themselves. That's more important than saving whatever that money is. And so the fear does drive demand, but as costs go up, it doesn't have as much a direct impact on demand as at least I would think. Let's now jump into the big piece of this, the data-driven historical demand, and then what's the assumptions about what happened historically and how that drives the future. Again, on the macro historical side, this is that same chart from NICS. If you look at that trending, the trending shows that 2024 will be about the same as 2023. Depends on how you look at that trending and where you start and end it, but it could actually be a little higher. So at the macroeconomic side, it actually could be up. Let's go to Tom and dig into some of the scope data.
Fantastic, guys. We're going to look at scope DLX, our distributor shipment data out. And, it's just another tool in our toolbox. We've looked at a lot of things right now. So we've got quantitative, qualitative. I remember when I first started off, it was like, oh, your forecast is just a swag. Well, now, we've gotten so much more information. It's become more of an informed assessment than just a swag. So looking at this year over year, prior year, just a firearm mix, you see handguns were roughly 58% of the mix. Looking at current year, 55% of the mix. It's like, oh God, handguns are falling off. They're going away. Keep it in mind, guys. Handguns are still over half the business. So, how handguns go, how the market goes. But what's interesting is this, when you look at shotguns and rifles, you look at long guns other than MSR, and they're up, and they've been trending up for a while now. So the big part of this is, shotgun and firearms continue to grow. What share, or how are things going in different communities? If you're looking geographically, are there different communities planning different ways? These are just SharePoint guidelines that help you kind of reel in your investment right off the bat, or how you to help you plan at a macro level. Chris, what's we on the next one? Looking at handguns, and check out the graph on the top left. I'm not even talking about 2019 in these graphs anymore. We peaked in 2021, and then it's just been trending off since then. Take out 2021, look at 22 and 3, and that decline is slowing. I mean, we're getting back to a point of normal that is still well above 19. We've talked about it, but it is declining. And think about a lot of that decline. We haven't had a lot of newness in the market in the past several years, just because struggling to keep up with the demand from the surge, and then trying to rebuild assortments to get something back on the shelf. So just trying to get the product there is a big deal. Looking at the graph on the bottom, hey, let's go back. Oh, that's fine. Looking at the graph on the bottom, we see, shipments building through show season in March, and then they trail off for the balance of the year, and boom, here comes October. October was another micro surge with things going on in Israel and Hamas and just different things. Also, it was part of the launch for the holiday season. So will we anniversary that? So a couple of things to think about here. Will we anniversary that level of impact, or to some degree, or will we not reference it at all? All right, next slide, Chris, please, sir. Looking at this one, a key metric would be always understanding how productive is your inventory. You want the inventory to work for you. You want inventory to generate revenue. So when we look at this for all of handguns, looking at the columns, those are weeks of supply. You see where the columns are at their highest? Well, that's July, August, September, October, the back half of every year, building into more of the hunting season and the seasonality and gift giving and holiday season. You look at the dotted line, that dotted line is an average week of shipments based on a rolling 13 weeks. Notice the trend on that thing. When you look to the left and then compare it to the right, that trend is declining as well. So the overall trend from the beginning of January 22 to the end of 23, it's still a decline. There are little peaks and valleys, but it's declining. Last but not least, if you look at the weeks of supply and say, oh, 10 weeks of supply, it's a lot of inventory. Keep in mind, this is every handgun, caliber, flavor, manufacturer, whatever you want to call it. 9 weeks of supply across all of distribution is not a lot of inventory. That's roughly just over a 5.5 turns. So not a lot of inventory to support sales growth and forward sales. Lastly, on this slide, looking at October, you see again where that micro surge was. It picked up some sales, but it leveled off as we got to the end of the year through the holiday season. All right, Chris. Looking at rifles. Rifles is kind of an exception, an anomaly. Everybody's seen this looking from the beginning of the surge to now. It's the only category that hasn't declined. It continues to grow. It increased through the COVID surge, and it just hadn't looked back. Bolt action, bolt is king. Everyone is aware of that, but lever guns, oh my God, we get some inventory in lever guns. People start recovering, and lever guns have been on fire. There's been a lot of pent-up demand. New manufacturers are getting into lever guns, and it just, to be honest, it hasn't seemed to slow. Lever guns were up 15% at the beginning of 23, and they ended up almost 27%. So they're growing as far as a percentage of the category, and there is really no, well, I shouldn't say no, but very limited weeks of supply. Looking at it the same way we did in handguns, we've got less than 8 weeks of inventory based on current rate of sale, and the current rate of sale has been going up, has been flat or going up for the past 18 months. So it's a big deal there. If you look at the chart on the right, lever action guns, 27%, over 1 in 4 rifles is a lever gun. I mean, that's big news. All right. Looking at MSRs, they did peak with the COVID fear of the surge, but they fell off pretty hardcore, very steadily, and so we're back at pre-COVID levels. looking again at the graph on the bottom, I'm building a lot on the graphs about productivity. I mean, if the inventory is not working, there's issues. But you see the dotted line again, those are average sales. They continue to decline. But one of the advantages of the October surge was it did pull out a lot of the excess inventory that had been around for quite a while. Now, excuse me, notice we were at 11 and 12 weeks of supply before that hit. We came out of that surge at 5, just under 6 weeks of supply. So there's an opportunity to rebuild the MSR market. There are new price points. There's a new good, better, best theory. We have more informed consumers, a lot of research. So there's a chance to rebuild and to level off some of the decline in the MSR business. So the inventory is there.
In 5.5 weeks, 6 weeks is pretty low overall, right?
Well, it really is. If you start thinking about it, we're talking about every AR, AK from every manufacturer and every caliber available. So you start thinking about it, that's a 10 term based on the inventory that's had all of the top sellers sucked out of it in October, November.
That would be nice if we could do that on a recurring basis, the turns.
It would be, wouldn't it? So looking at shotguns, and again, I sound like a broken record, shotguns is normalizing after the COVID piece, but look at it, 22, 23, they're virtually flat. So there's some things really happening in shotgun sales. So I'm just gonna look at the circles over on the right. We look at it by action from prior year to current year. Semi-automatic down just slightly, over and under up just slightly. I mean, there's gonna be fluctuations. So these aren't huge changes. What I want to look at really is from the tactical side. We look at tactical coming out of the COVID portion. There was a lot of home defense. Tactical guns really found a new level, and it's not going away. That's a big phrase. It's not going away, or it hasn't been going away. So tactical has pretty much been taking up 40% of the marketplace, just looking at a simple 60-40 split between field gun and tactical. Field guns are very seasonal. Tactical guns aren't. I mean, they flow. There is a seasonality to it, don't get me wrong, but tactical guns are not going away. And when you look at it at the bottom, semi-automatic or pump action, there's a switch. Semi-automatic field guns are dominant, 60-40 over tactical. It reverses when you get to pump action. Pump action at 60-40 tactical to field. Think about it for a minute. When you think about semi-automatic, they're a little higher priced. The pump action is a little lower priced, but I'm going to contradict myself. If you do a hardcore look at the marketplace, high-end semi-automatic tactical shotguns are on fire, much to the level of lever action guns. I mean, you can't get enough of them. There's 2 or 3 weeks of supply in the marketplace. It's been that way for a year. And I'm talking about $1,000 plus guns. So there's a new balance. I'd say there's a new sheriff in town, but basically tactical has become a staple at 40%, and it's staying there. So again, a baseline. Looking at shotguns, we're very familiar with this graph. Notice where all the columns are getting high. That's going into hunting season. It's just before dove season. It's building up. Overall, after a little bit of a drop at the beginning of 22, sales have been flat. And then boom, here they go in October, just like the mini surge. The October lift was driven by tactical. Okay. 7 weeks of supply. We won't go through every one of these, but notice how we can drill down. Now we're actually using data to make more informed decisions on semi-automatic versus pump action productivity in the top, tactical versus field in the bottom. How are we narrowing this down, and what does it mean? So big eye chart, not going to read this thing to you, but NICS check, seasonal pattern. If you look at January and February of 24, they're virtually identical to the last couple of years. Handgun sales, we said, are declining. Hopefully that'll change with a little bit of new product and a launch and generate some excitement. I've seen cautious optimism in the way people are buying. If you think about it, NICS checks for the year are down slightly. Purchases are down slightly. I mean, it's right in line with NICS. So waiting to see, saving open to buy for what's next, what's new, buying back into what's needed. Rifles continue to grow year over year. I mean, I'm not going to go away from that, but lever guns. How much more demand is in the marketplace for lever guns? I mean, we haven't found the bottom yet. Just a word of caution, as so many players are getting into it, the market is full of lever guns. Plan accordingly, but keep in mind we'll start anniversarying high inventory levels later in the year. Shotgun sales, shotguns have leveled off. We just talked about that, 60-40 field to tactical. Make sure you have a balance, can buy back into it, but high-end tactical, don't discount the need for tactical. Don't discount the need for high-end tactical. There is a market and customers just can't get enough. Feeling overall for me though is firearms. They're going to continue their decline. I mean, we're coming off of year over year huge growth. It's falling off. It's naturally falling off and getting to another level. We already brought up there's a new normal versus 2019, so it's just leveling itself off. What's it going to look like? It depends on the new offering, the new products that are available to give people a reason to buy. And Chris already hit on some of the election and just different uncertainties in the marketplace. We've got a lot of qualifiable instead of quantifiable data that can help us make those decisions. So the big takeaway I have is we need to start broadening the offering, the breadth of offering, give the customers choice so they have more than just our top 3 guns. But they need the offering to see what's there. We can flow the top sellers and be able to broaden the assortment. So a lot going on with firearms. Let's get newness going. Chris?
And people are asking, so I'll mention it, that we will have some specific forecasts at the category level going forward. Okay, we'll get that at the end. So, and we just got to keep moving. Go ahead, Tom.
All righty. Starting off the same place, ammunition, top left. Notice that, you know, it is slowly declining. I mean, just very slowly. 23 ended with a bang, just with the, again, that micro surge. Looking at it on the bottom, you can see the red line where it surged in October. Basically, all the excess 5.56 to 9mm left. It's gone. So that market's going to be rebuilding. It's got to catch up. We have to rebuild the shelf and get it back into business. One part is keep in mind too, there are a lot of calibers and a lot of guns out there. So there's more than 9, more than 5.56, but those are the core volume drivers. Chris? Looking again at the very similar graph, you notice this graph has come in pretty handy. It tells us a lot of stuff, and this is just centerfire. I limit it to just centerfire because it's the scale. 75, basically 75% of the shipments have been in centerfire. And when you look at this, you see these big, tall blue bars. That's 11 weeks of supply. That's not that much inventory when you're talking about centerfire rifle, pistol, the grain weights, the calibers, the whole 9 yards. But when you look at it in February of 24, we've got less than 6 weeks of supply based on current rate of sale. Less than 6 weeks. So there is some shortness there. Kevin, what do you think about that, man? Is it a hangover after that October surge, or what do you think?
Well, it's a lot of it's the mix. So when we think about centerfire, you've got hunting and you've got military calibers. I would say that from what we see, because of all the things you've already spoken about with in the news, Ukraine, Israeli, Hamas, that whole conflict, and then other, how do we respond to the United States? You know, we see that demand, and with a really low weeks of supply, we see a lot of demand there. But then you look at the hunting side of the market and centerfire rifle, there's probably a hangover there. People were used to having to go search for the 30-30s, and now there's 30-30s on the shelf. So it depends on the mix, and we look at it that way. We look at it by the symbol level and try to figure out what mix is causing inventories to go up or down, and how do we react to that from a supply chain standpoint? Or do we need to sell our raw materials, cardboard boxes? So
we got a perfect segue. I mean, honestly, because I know you and I've talked about it a lot. There's inventory gaps in select calibers. I mean, 5.56 and 9s went away, but there are more. But are the hunting calibers? Let me reflect on that for a moment. Is there excess inventory because there have been fewer shipments because everybody was buying the other calibers? But you're right. I mean, there is inventory there. So plan accordingly. What can you get? What can't you get?
Right.
Looking at a potential powder shortage on the horizon. I mean, it takes a lot of powder to load a howitzer shell. I mean, it really does. And so military contracts take priority, I understand. And, import of powder can can add pressure. So, that's going to lend itself to a price increase. And I don't want to call it panic buying. I would say it's more product availability buying. If there's a powder shortage and there's a shortage of 9s and 5.56, the more volume calibers, it's going to lend itself to people buying as it shows up and buying in bulk. Just kind of an overall thought.
We gotta move forward, but I want to get insight from Kevin while he's here. Because Kevin, you told me again, you do 90-day planning is more planning, and then we'll after that. What's been the big insights you've had in putting plans together and how it's helped the business?
Well, I mean, you and I spoke, this industry in general is behind the curve in terms of how we forecast demand. And it's something we put a lot of effort into, more recently with personnel and trying to just figure out, through scope data, through edifice data, through SPS Commerce with our retailers, where are the trends, and then, matching that up with the buyers on our team, what are they having a hard time getting, and what are commodities doing? What are metal prices doing? Do we need to build early on something and hold it for a little while, anticipating demand, or do we need to just kind of keep up with demand? With this new normal, as we kind of talked, it's been a pretty good flow of being able to build to orders within a 90-day window by the symbol, and then use our history, use our forecast, use what we see in scope data and edifice data, and then what gun manufacturers are building, lever guns being a focus for a lot of gun manufacturers, build that into our forecast outside of 90 days to make sure that we have raw materials to build, the things we think are going to be in high demand come later months. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah, that's the impact on the supply chain. We've been focusing on the finished goods, but the whole supply chain is another piece of this, right? So Tom, we got like 10 minutes left.
Yeah,
so
we'll fly through this one. Optics, let me just hit real quick. Optics has been plagued by excess inventory. Go ahead and hit the next slide, Chris. Excess inventory has been there, excess of 30 some odd weeks. Notice the red line, that's just a trend line. Shipments have been flat, inventory's been high. We're at 16 weeks of inventory right now at a slow time of the year. Big thing here, you're always going to have the accessories for optics, but red dots, handguns more and more are available with red dots installed. They have the base plates. Red dots for long guns have always been good. And then rifle scopes. Rifle scopes have been building based over time. So optics, buy what you need, but don't get overly aggressive. Optics summary, we just pretty much hit that. Identify checkouts early and jump back on it. I've seen a lot of missed opportunity because you buy the assortment and never go back to the well. So from a distributor standpoint, identify the checkout, go back to the assortment planning. And this is just 101. Everyone understands that, guys, you can't buy enough inventory to support your top sellers for a year. You just can't afford it. So if you're going to have any kind of offering or breadth of inventory, you need to have, you'll turn your top sellers faster, your slow sellers much slower, and then there's an average. So use it as a gauge. Plan on turning your top sellers quickly. Stay in stock by programming out the orders. So you receive orders over time. If you have one to show, one to go, so to speak, as a slow seller, okay, there's an inventory level, and then fill the gap. You don't have to be all things to all people. Decide where you want to play, how you want to afford it, so that you can have max assortment, but not getting over your head. Chris?
That's great, Tom. So we're gonna kind of wrap up now. Again, we've been talking about the data-driven approach, looking at the historical demand, and really, what does that mean going forward? Again, as you think about the 7 areas that we're going to talk about, what's the probability that they're going to happen? What's the impact if they do? So let's talk about now what those, these are the 7 areas you looked at, one of them being your own growth plan. What is our assumptions? Okay, our assumptions are that on the trifecta correction it's done, there's going to be no increase or decrease on that. Historical demand, the trending is still going up, maybe some small growth. You've got a lot of new shooters. We're still 20% above 2019. We think there'll be a little growth there. Election concerns, that's a big variable. Again, if Trump wins, nothing's going to really happen, right? If Biden wins, well, excuse me, if Trump wins and there's no unrest, and if Biden wins, there's no unrest, that's the real question. So you see the green is the elections don't have an impact, but what might come out of it is really the question mark, which people don't really, I don't have a good sense on. What's the likelihood of it happening? Regulatory changes, again, nothing if Trump happens, few if Biden, but he'd have to have all of Congress and overcome some of the Supreme Court and Second Amendment changes. Again, world events, maybe some impact because of the demands on ammo in particular. Economics, again, not a big driver of demand. The economy it's more about the safety and security that people are more worried about. But the bigger again question is, your plan. How does your plan impact? What are you going to do yourself to basically outperform, the industry and your competition? So now what we're going to do is we're going to put that into some numbers, and Tom's going to explain why he's going to. What's the handgun, Tom?
Handguns, I'm saying flat to down 5%. I mean, kind of in line with a third of what you guys are thinking. All about newness. If we can get some newness in the channel and just keep it flowing. But again, we are still normalizing, and we got to flatten out. Rifles, 5 to 7% growth. I think there's still legs, or a lot of legs under lever guns. Pistol calibers have been coming on. Bolts still volume, but don't underestimate these other two. A little bit of caution with semi-automatic. It's been slowing, but overall rifles 5 to 7. Shotguns, again, I see 3 to 5% growth. It's just getting back into the balance and getting the inventory back in place and having it readily available on the shelf. Steady growth. I think there is room for the growth on the tactical side. Just don't go from one ditch to the other and go crazy with it. Ammo, I think it's flattened down just because of availability issues. I'm not sure if we'll be able to produce and get caught up. It would be nice to see that change, but I haven't seen it in 24 data yet.
Kevin, what are you guys projecting? Are you projecting up, flat, down? What can you share with us?
Up slightly. Yeah, up slightly. I think what we plan on is up slightly, but nothing too huge. And it's a lot of the reasons you just mentioned, Tom. Just the uncertainty about raw materials and powder and other things, and play into it.
Hey, Kevin, before we go on with that one, do you think seasonality and shot shell and buying accordingly can help at all?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of seasonality, I think we're in the hunting rifle market. We're in a normal seasonal pattern. We likely are going to be always chasing anything military, anything in the handgun or rifle space, military. So that will be, the areas where you're up. I would also say we're probably going to be up in shot shells considerably. I mean, we're already up considerably in target shot shells. Hunting shot shells probably also up, but not as much as target shot shells. Some of the target shot shells are up because we had them built early against what we thought demand would be, and we're seeing it now, chasing that participation. But then hunting, just because hunting is also up, and we got ahead of building some of that inventory as well, knowing we'd have some raw material issues, mainly powder, later in the year. So, I think that's kind of by category what we're looking at forecast wise.
Chris, I'm being generous with optics by saying flat. Their average sales have been flat over the past 2 years. Got a lot of weeks of supply still in the marketplace. We could be slightly up depending on the inventory flow and if we get a good mix of scopes and red dots.
And the final overall, so this is the question we asked earlier. So we asked earlier, what was the demand going to be for firearms? We had everything from, 7% of people said it was going to be down 8%, 13% is going to be up over 8%. We believe it's going to be more in that 2 to 5% up overall. So if you answered C, which was we had 1 to 7% as a range, we had 36% thinking that, at least right in line with our thinking. But now the question is, though, what do you do with it, right? So, we've got some data we've shared with you, again, based on the assumptions that we have. It's really now, what do you do about it? We've looked at, two categories of companies, so say those that aren't doing it. So when we asked the poll earlier, how many are doing it? No one said they're not doing it at all. It's just a matter of what level of detail. So for those that are not doing it or doing it in enough detail, go in and look at your assumptions. How, and do you document those assumptions? Do you challenge those assumptions? Do you review that forecast and you compare it to actual on a recurring basis? When you get into more advanced people, I'm sure they're doing the reviews. I'm listening to Kevin, they do those reviews, in that 30-day cycle, and then adjust accordingly based on what's coming in. So, review that forecast, review the challenges and assumptions, and revise the forecast. I've worked with many companies, and it seems like some owners have a concept of, why would you reforecast? And I'm like, well, because it's wrong. If it's not right, why would you, you should probably reforecast. We started off by saying, if you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail. The goal here was to really help, share with you at least our thoughts and assumptions about what we thought was going to happen with demand at the category level, looking at all different types of assumptions from historical to elections, regulatory, world events, and then bring that into play. The bottom line we have at the firearms level, the macro level, is at 2 to 7% up. Hopefully your internal plans, your internal new products, new channels, new customers is going to exceed that, and that's where you're going to get the growth. We've got a lot of questions, but we've only got 2 minutes left, so I don't want to jump into them too much. I will say that if you want to get more information on scope, Tom, I'm going to plug this for you. You can reach out to Tom, and I'm sure he'd gladly do a demo for you. I've used that data both as a president of a wholesaler and also as a consultant. It's phenomenal. Yeah, I'm an engineer, so I'm definitely wired that way. But reach out to that, and if you have any other questions, you can reach out to me and Tom. I didn't put Kevin's email on there. You can chase him down on LinkedIn if you want. But I guess I'm going to wrap up and thank Tom and Kevin for joining us here. Any final comments you want to make, Tom?
No, I mean, Chris, if you want to share the questions, we can see about posting them when we send back out the deck and all the pieces. But it's been great sharing thoughts. We have a strong toolbox, qualitative and quantitative. So take advantage of it for informed decisions.
Yeah, I'll probably answer the questions directly. I know who did them, and I can answer those directly. Kevin, okay. Thank you for joining us. Where do we go to get that coupon for the discount on the ammo is what I want to know.
I'm always the advocate of going to our website, but I don't know that you're going to find a coupon. I would say go to shootunited.com. If I'm going to throw out an ad, it's not something that we sponsor, but it's something that gets more people involved in our industry, and that's always good to have that.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. Thank NASGW for sponsoring this and getting attendees. Everyone listening, thanks for attending, and hope you go do something with what you've learned today. So we're wrapping up. We're done. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Chris, thank you.